today I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk about documentation. And it was Docs as Code approach was the last slide I presented during GDevCon at Amsterdam this year. And I'm glad to have 45 minutes to dive into this topic. Before diving into the topic, let's start with our giant, our female. And today I want to highlight Tatiana Boyer. And when I speak with Tatiana about this slide, she asked me to change a bit the traditional tag, our giants are female, to make it our giants are not only male. So I give a try to this new tag. And why Tatiana Boyer? Tatiana used to do a lot of LabVIEW development. And she did lots of inspiring presentations during the European GLA Summits. And one of them was related to today's topic. And this presentation inspired lots and much of the work I've been doing during these last 3 or 4 years on my open source projects. So she had a huge impact on my work. And I hope that during this last 24 hours, you've had the opportunity to experience the same inspiring moment. So thank you, Tatiana, for all the talks I could have hear from you. A bit of presentation. Who am I? I'm Olivier Jourdan. I'm from France. You probably hear that with my accent. I started using LabVIEW in the previous century, and it's still my first tool, the one I love using every day. I'm the founder of Wova Lab in 2018. I'm a really proud member of the board of the DQMH consortium. And if you want to reach out to me, follow, etc., I have a LinkedIn and a Twitter account. So feel free to reach out to me on these networks. So today's topic is documentation. And before diving into the Docs as Code approach, I want to talk about documentation in the general way. So what documentation are we writing? I can see two different documentation a LabVIEW developer would like or would have to write. The first one is the source code documentation. We need to help to have something that help understand the code, because we have maintenance issue. We need to onboard new developers on a project. We need to share information with non-developer people, with people that don't read LabVIEW code. And probably you can have some, you can have to follow some regulation rules that make this kind of documentation mandatory. So the goals for this kind of documentation is quality improvement and development management. But we also have the documentation for the application or the API. So we need a documentation to help the end users so they can use your application easily without you explaining everything. And also to enroll new user. When I want to give a try to an application, I like to find the documentation, the user documentation, to see if the application is fitting my needs. So goals are different here. first for support of the end user, and probably for marketing purpose, because it can help to sell your application. So who is writing the documentation? In the theory, I would say that it could be the developer team, it could be the support team, and it could be the marketing team. Those three teams have some interest to write documentation. But in the reality, it's often the unlucky guy or nobody. And we really want to avoid that. And we want to avoid the thing that is happening usually. Because the documentation is not a priority task. And because the documentation is not an easy task, it's complex to write prose. It's really easier to write LabVIEW code. And because the documentation processes are rarely well defined, it ends up with bad documentation, not up-to-date documentation. And so it's not really valuable for anyone. The usual processes I came across during my career is that we use editors like Microsoft Word or Helpendoc. This is a really specific application used to write doc. I used to use wiki softwares like Confluence, DokuWiki, things like that. And as far as I'm using this tool, the tool and the content you are writing are completely disconnected from the code. They are not stored in the same location. They are not part of the definition of done. So if you are implementing a feature in your LabVIEW code, you don't have any task related to the documentation. And probably in all the years I written documentation, this task was done after the rest, when there are no budget and no time. So the result is this vicious circle. Documentation is not a priority, so you are not defining clear process. So because there are no clear process, it's a dull task. So the documentation is not up to date. So you are not using the documentation available. So because it's not used, it's not a priority task, and etc., etc. So the goal is to stop that vicious circle. And I am offering you to talk about Docs as code and this approach. So what is it? Docs as code try to implement the same workflow and the same tools we are using for development. So we place our documentation in a repository. Could be the same repository than the code, but it could be also another repository. But we are using a repository, so we can have all changes in memory. We are using issue tracking, and we use automated tasks to test the documentation, build the documentation, and deliver the documentation at the end. The same thing we are trying to do with our LabVIEW code. So the goals are to remove the pain points with the automation. And because we are removing the pain points, we can focus on writing content. That's where the valuable things is. And we also want to deliver documentation with the code. So the documentation is up to date. And people can read the documentation and get the thing in your application. So what we need to implement the docs as code approach? We need a Git repository for the code documentation. We need a markup language because we know as a LabVIEW developer, we know that binary files are not really easy to handle with Git. And because we use a markup language, so markup language is plain text file, so it's just text. And this is not something you are going to deliver to the end user. So we need to have a processor to render the documentation at the end to have a PDF or HTML file, for example. And at the end, we need an automation tool like CI/CD or anything that can run tasks automatically. That's docs as code approach. So now the rest of the almost all the presentation is going to talk about 2 examples. These 2 examples are from open source projects. So you can have the source of the documentation I'm going to talk about. And this presentation is also available as an open source content. So the first example I want to talk about is the DQMH Consortium Style Guide. You probably heard about this. We released early in September our style guide for LabVIEW programming, and it's available in 2 different formats, PDF and HTML. So if we look at the PDF content, we have a 30-page document with links, with all the modern way to navigate into a document. And we also have the same document as an HTML version. So this is the same content, but one in the PDF format and the other in the HTML format. I have to say that this example doesn't involve any LabVIEW code, but the process, all the things we are using can completely be used in a LabVIEW project you want to add documentation in. So, which techniques and tools are we using? The content is written manually using ASCII doc syntax. For those who want to know more about the ASCII doc syntax, you can watch my presentation during the last GDevCon. It was about creating documentation with LabVIEW and using ASCII doc syntax. So you will have all the information needed. Basically, ASCII doc syntax allows you to format content in a plain text style, and then you will get the PDF and the HTML file using the ASCII doctor processor. The last tool we are using is a GitLab project. And we use the GitLab project to have a repository, an issue tracker, and the CI/CD tools needed to the automation. So the process is the following. We are using semantic versioning to release our style guide. So we have a V100, a V101, etc., etc. So we use Git flow as a workflow in Git. And we configured the CI/CD tasks with the following things. When we are pushing something on develop or feature branches, we render the PDF and the HTML document with a draft watermark. This is kind of building a beta version of the documentation. And we upload the file to a draft folder on the documentation.org website. And this is kind of deploying the beta version in a sandbox. So we can check that the documentation is correctly rendered, etc., etc. Once we release a version, we are pushing on the release or the hotfix branches. So the CI is going to render the PDF and the HTML documents. So we are building the final version without the draft watermark. And we are uploading the file on the documatch.org website. So we deploy the document in the production, And when I say we, it's all automatic tasks. So if we look at the schema, we have an ADoc file, and we run automatic tasks that call ASCII doctor to process the ADoc file into HTML and PDF. We are transferring this HTML and PDF file through FTP in our website. And so at the end, the documentation is released. All of these steps are already automated. So let's dive into the style guide GitLab project. The thing we can see that we have folders of resources, images, etc. But the really interesting part is the style guide. This is one file with the extension ADoc. As you can see, GitLab, and it's the same thing for GitHub. When you have a plain text file with the ADoc extension, GitLab is already creating a preview of the file. So you already have something readable by a human. And if we look at the raw file, we have the ASCII doc syntax. That's the thing. So this is our source code for our documentation. We have issues, so we can track what we want to add, what we want to fix, etc. And we have the pipeline. So in the CI/CD, we can see that we have some automated tasks run when we are pushing things. If I'm looking to the latest push we did on the develop branch, I can access the artifacts we add at the end of the process. And I can see if I open, for example, the PDF style guide, that we have the same PDF I showed you earlier, but with the draft. So we know that this is not a final release of the document. We also have some traceability information. On the first page, we can see that this version has been rendered from the develop branch. We have the date, and we have the commit related to this version. So it's really easy to know what was the changes, etc., and what is the source code of this documentation, the source of this documentation. Another interesting thing when you are using ASCII doc syntax is that you can include files. This style guide is open source, so we have a license. And this license here, we add the content of the license in our document, but the content you can see here is not in the main ADoc file, but it comes from the content of the file name license you should have in your repository to tell people this project is under this kind of license. So we avoid any duplication of content using the include feature of the ASCII doc syntax. So some question that came after this is, okay, it's great, it's automated, you can avoid duplication, you can generate HTML or PDF, but you need to learn and you need to write text file with a really with a syntax you need to learn. So yes, there is some learning here, but if you are using the right tool, it's really straightforward. My setup is the following. I'm using Visual Studio Code, and this is a free application. And you have extensions to this application that enables a preview of your document. So if I'm looking to Visual Studio Code here, you can see that on the left, I have the source of the plain text file. You have some coloration, so it's easy to see the syntax. You can see the sections here. And on the right, you can have the preview. If I'm changing, for example, this admonition block, this is a tip. I can say it's important. It should change. Demo. Okay. The preview is not changing. I don't know why, but it should change. I think I changed some settings. Anyway, you have tools that helps you to write using the ASCII doc syntax. And if you want to create really advanced formatting, the ASCII doc documentation website is really, really, really awesome. You can find everything you need to create great content for your documentation. So what we get with the docs as code approach, we are rendering automatically the final documents. We are deploying the documents automatically. There is content adaptation. So depending of the branches we are pushing, we have the draft watermark, we have the traceability. All those things are automating, and all those things are the boring things you need to do when you are using Microsoft Word, for example. The result is that we can really focus on the content, and releasing a new version is just one click. It's really fast. That's Doxas Code approach, and that's what you can get from Doxas Code approach. So let's dive in a second example. This second example is about the WobaLab open source projects documentation website. So I've been working on this website for 3 months, about. Not at full-time job, but yeah, as an open source project. And the goal is to gather all the information from the 5 open source projects we are maintaining at WobaLab in the same static website. So if we look at this website, you can see that we have on the left the 5 projects we are maintaining. And for example, you have for this anti-doc add-on, you have 2 different versions. So if I dive into the website and I'm looking for what is documented by this add-on, I can see here, and you can see that navigation in the website is quite modern. You can see that with the 2.1 version, we are documenting the GKE state machines. But I can access the 2.0 documentation. And in this version, GKE state machine wasn't documented. But user still access all the version, the document of all the version of the tool. So that's a website really focused on documenting API or applications. So that was the goal, how we did it. Techniques and tools. Like the first example, we are writing manual content using ASCII doc syntax. But we also use some automatically generated content created with Antidoc. And the website is generated using Antora. So Antora is a project that builds static websites using content written in ASCII doc syntax. So each open source project in GitLab contains the documentation files. And we have 2 specific GitLab projects used to build the website and or at least to configure and build the website and build the custom UI. The process is the following. For each open source project, we are creating docs branches, one for each version we want to document. And those branches are the source of the content used by Antora. At the end, the website is hosted on GitLab pages. So this is a way to provide a static website to the user. you have the same feature on GitHub. So if we look at the process in this picture, we have 3, 4, many different repository with different branches for documentation. And when we run the automatic tasks, Antora is going to check out all these branches, build the website, and then we are publishing it on Pages. So the website is available for the users. So let's dive into the open source GitLab project. So here we have all the projects that contain the code of the GitLab project. And if we dive into the LabVIEW project add-on for Antidoc, we can see that we have different branches. We have the usual main develop, and if we are working on feature, we will have a feature branch, etc. But we have those 2 new branches where you can find the content of the documentation. So we have this new folder in these branches, and you have here all the content needed to build the website. So I can find the pages. The one I showed you was this one. And this is the content that is going to be used by Antora. When you have a new version, you are just starting a new branch from the latest docs branch, and you modify the file needed to be modified. So what we get with the docs as code approach on this example, we are building a website automatically. We are just writing ASCII doc syntax, and at the end, we have the website I showed you. The documentation website deals with multiple projects and multiple versions. And this is also a straightforward way to contribute, because something I didn't show you on the website is that on the top right corner, you have this edit this page link. And if I click on it, it's going to send me to the file content of the page. So if you want to contribute to the documentation, I think you can find at least some spelling issues or so English errors. It's really easy for you to modify this. So if you take this example and you build the same process for an internal project, you can get more contribution from other people, from the support, from the marketing team, etc., because they just need to learn a bit of Git and a bit of ASCII doc syntax, and the content could be modified really easily, because at the end the release and the building of the website is automated. So the development process is greatly improved because we are releasing the documentation in the same time we are releasing the new tool. Updating the documentation is flawless, and as I showed you, you have easy way to contribute to the documentation. I finished with the 2 examples. I want to dive a bit in a way to generate content automatically. You probably already heard about Antidoc. If not, this is a tool available on VIPM that creates documentation automatically. And this tool is using ASCII-Doc syntax. So it's really easy to use the output of this tool into your into the content you write. There are 2 different add-ons to Antidoc. One that is providing the documentation of a LabVIEW project. So this is the code source documentation. Just, I forget. This is, I didn't change the right screen. So this is Antidoc, and this is the content you can get from a project. This is the documentation you get from a LabVIEW project. Excuse me. Here we have a project you can find in the examples provided with LabVIEW. And as you can see, ASCII-Doc enables you to write text, to build tables, but also to integrate some diagrams like this class diagram. So it supports Plant2ML syntax, for example. So you can get really interesting information from your project. The second add-ons is just about generating documentation from your toolkits. So VIs in your functions palette can be documented. Here we have the ASCII-Doc toolkit for LabVIEW documented. And if I'm going to the ASCII-Doc toolkit part of the website, you can see that I get exactly the same documentation. I didn't rewrite these things, but just copy paste the content from Antidoc to my docs folder. So you can create your own automated content. There are 2 different ways to do that. You can create an add-on for Antidoc. So if the current add-ons don't fit your needs, you can create a specific add-on for Antidoc that is going to build your own documentation. You can also use the ASCII-Doc for LabVIEW toolkit. This is just the toolkit that builds the ASCII-Doc syntax file. So you can use this toolkit to create your own ASCII-Doc files automatically. So there are lots of ways to create automated content for your documentation. So, as a conclusion, what we get with the Docs as Code approach and how we can improve it. So with this approach, we made the documentation task part of the development process. So you can't forget it anymore. If you are defining the documentation as a part of the definition of done of an issue or a task in your development, you are going to update the documentation in the process of the development. All the repetitive and boring tasks are automated. So you can really focus on the content, and you know that the documentation and the content you are modifying or creating are going to be available for the end user. So you know that your task is valuable, and it makes a lot of difference. And because you have set up a process, you are already ready to onboard new contributors. Because when it's difficult to explain how to change a documentation, you don't want, it's not the right way to help to have more contribution. So with a process, a clear process, it's really easy. It's at least easier to get new contributors to your documentation. There are possible improvements. As we do with our LabVIEW code, we can test the documentation. For example, and this is something I didn't use so far, but this is something I have in mind to improve my process on the documentation. We could test the URLs, check that we have no errors when we are opening the URLs, test spellings automatically, and we can have blacklist word because probably you want to avoid some terms in your documentation, or you want to be sure that this product name is always spelled with the right case or the right way. And we can also improve the integration of auto-generated content into the documentation. So far, I'm using the copy-paste, but probably if I'm trying to make it easier, I can find some way to implement it better. So, as a final word, I want to highlight Dan Allen tweet. Dan Allen is the co-lead of the ASCII Doctor project and the Antora project. He said, a talented tech writer is worth as much as a talented developer. Good prose is no more or less complex to write than good code. I totally agree with that. So docs as code is not magical. It's not going to make you writing good prose, but at least it will help you to focus on this task and not doing boring and repetitive tasks. So I hope that this presentation had give you some ideas on how to use the docs as code approach in your projects. You are not going to follow exactly the two examples I showed you, but you can get some inspiration from these examples. All the codes are available on GitLab. There is a new polls in the poll section, I think, so you can check out this and vote. And if you have some questions, I think we have some time left. Yes, we have 10 or 15 minutes. Can these tools be used to automatically extract documentation from within LabVIEW? using bookmarks to add to the ASCII doc files. Yes, definitely. This is something anti-doc can do. There is an issue on that. It's really something possible to parse a project, find the bookmarks, and generate the ASCII doc file related to the bookmark. Yes. It will probably be implemented in the next releases of Antidoc. Yes, you can do everything you want. You just need to code this, but yeah, we can imagine that the bookmarks, we can have, if I'm thinking about how the bookmarks can be added to the LabVIEW project add-on, it should be something you can configure and just say, I want this bookmark in my final documentation. Do you have an example of auto-generation? I can, this is, here, this HTML file is generated automatically with Antidoc. So it takes a LVProj as an input, and then you are going to get the description of the project, the classes in the project, and a section for each classes. And you have a different example of what you can get with Antidoc if you check the documentation website. Here you have the documentation showcase. And for example, we can see this documentation is from a DQMH project. So you have module relationship, for example, and a section for all modules, etc., etc. I can post the doc websites in the chat. Okay, okay. I remember an approach from Zulke, which used LabVIEW bookmarks to create complete documentation. Okay. So when you create your source code documentation in a separate repository, how do you link the doc to the source code version? I would probably not separate the documentation from the code repository. I like, and I need to say that this documentation, the whole topic is fairly new for me compared to my LabVIEW experience. I just started to work on that during the last 3 years. But so far, I will add the documentation to the code project. So I can get information from the Git flow workflow into the document. It's still possible to create a repository for the documentation and create the branches with the correct version. And something important to say probably is on the documentation. So on the website I'm showing here, you can see that if I look at the anti-doc version, this is the 2.0 version, and I didn't create a new branch for all the minor versions. So I have a new branch in my documentation when I'm changing the major of the, sorry, I'm not creating a new docs branch when it's a fix, but I'm creating a new branch when it's a major or a minor version upgrade. ASCII can generate HTML natively by using Antora for generating a website. No, Antora is using ASCII file to generate the website. Does it reply to your question, Brice? Why using Antora for generating? Oh, Brice, I didn't get your question correctly. ASCII doc can generate HTML document. You're right. But Antora is doing more than just HTML, because you have all this navigation there, and content is checked out from many different repositories. So it's far more complex than just rendering an ASCII doc file to an HTML file. You have all this feature related to the version of the tool you are documenting. You have this edit this page link that helps for contributions. You have also one thing I didn't set up so far. This is a search feature. So it's far more complex than just creating an HTML version of the file. Okay. It seems that there are no more questions. Thank you, everyone, to attend my presentation. There are still 1 hour for the GLA Summit, so enjoy it, and see you next time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the applause.